On a warm spring day, Tommaso, a bright and curious 8-year-old boy, was wandering through the alleys of his neighborhood. Raised on the streets, he had learned to navigate dangers and opportunities better than anyone else his age. His lively eyes explored every corner, every person, every detail of the life that flowed around him. Even though he was young, Thomas was gifted with precocious wisdom, the fruit of a life spent observing and learning from the world around him. Before continuing, subscribe to our channel and activate the bell. He lived with his mother, Giulia, in a small room in an old building that they shared with other families. It was a modest environment, but full of affection. Giulia, a strong and determined woman, worked tirelessly to support her son, doing very long shifts in a textile factory. Every evening she came home tired, but despite the fatigue, she always tried to spend time with Tommaso, listening to his stories and laughing at his little daily adventures. After school, Tommaso would dart out into the neighborhood streets with the freedom that only children seem to know. He knew everyone: the baker who would save him a fresh roll, the greengrocer who would always give him an apple, and even the neighborhood policeman who would nod at him. Everyone had a special affection for that curious and lively boy. Every day, Tommaso felt like a little explorer. The streets of his neighborhood were his playground, but also his school of life. He knew the dangers well. He knew how to avoid trouble and how to earn the respect of the people around him. His intelligence and his sly spirit had guaranteed him a certain protection in an environment that could be cruel. One evening, as usual, Tommaso went to the bus stop to wait for his mother. The sun was setting, painting the sky a deep orange, and Tommaso sat on the sidewalk with his legs dangling, imagining stories and adventures he had never experienced. He couldn't wait to tell his mother everything he had seen that day, but there was always one thought that tormented him: the fatigue he saw in her eyes, the weight she carried on her shoulders every day. Giulia arrived, tired as ever, but with a sweet smile on her face. Sitting together on the bench, Tommaso began to tell her about his day, about Mrs. Teresa from the bakery, who had given him a slice of cake, and about the greengrocer who had helped him avoid a fight between two older kids. Giulia listened to him, nodding affectionately, but with a subtle worry in her heart. He knew that the life they led was hard, too hard for a child his age, but it was all he could offer. At that moment, Tommaso did not know that his life was about to change radically. The next day, while wandering the streets as usual, he noticed an unusual commotion outside an upscale restaurant that was located on the edge of his neighborhood. Tommaso had never seen so much activity in that place. Luxury cars pulled up at the entrance, and elegant people dressed in shiny clothes walked in and out with ease. There were photographers, journalists, and a crowd of onlookers. Tommaso approached, attracted by the confusion, and discovered that they were celebrating the birthday of one of the richest men in the city, Mr. Lorenzo. His curiosity was too strong to resist. Tommaso couldn't help but wonder what it was like to live a life like that. The luxury, the cars, the fancy clothes, everything seemed to come from a world completely different from his own. He decided to go to the back of the restaurant, where he knew some of the employees. With his usual sly smile, he asked if he could have a piece of the party cake, and to his surprise, they gave it to him. Sitting on the back steps, with the cake in his hands, Tommaso watched everything with wide eyes. He was fascinated by that world that seemed so far from his daily reality. But while he was immersed in his thoughts, he felt a light touch on his shoulder. He turned quickly and saw an elderly man, elegantly dressed, looking at him with a kind smile. Thomas's heart raced, fearing he was in trouble. "What's your name, boy?" the man asked in a calm voice. "Tommaso," the boy replied, still nervous. The man smiled. "You know, I have a nephew with the same name as you," he said, making an unexpected connection. Tommaso, intrigued and reassured, began to talk to the man, telling him about his days, his life on the streets, and his mother who worked so hard to support him. The man listened to him attentively without interrupting. After a few minutes, the man introduced himself. It was Lorenzo, the birthday boy. Tommaso couldn't believe his luck. He had met the very man who was celebrating the luxurious party. But Lorenzo, despite all the opulence that surrounded him, seemed genuinely interested in Tommaso's story. Suddenly, Lorenzo was called by one of his guests, who informed him that everyone was waiting for him. He stood up, but before leaving, he instructed his employees to prepare a package of sweets for Tommaso to take home. As he walked away, Tommaso noticed that Lorenzo had dropped his wallet. Tommaso bent down to pick it up, but something struck him. Inside the wallet, there was a photo that seemed strangely familiar. A photo of himself when he was perhaps 6 months old, or maybe younger, identical to the one his mother kept on the nightstand. The boy was speechless, confused by that discovery. How could Lorenzo have a photo of himself? He opened his wallet again to be sure of what he had seen. The photo was there, very clear. It was an image of him as a newborn, in his mother's arms, just like the one Giulia jealously kept on her bedside table at home. Tommaso's heart was beating fast, confused and disturbed by that discovery. As he was trying to figure out what all this meant, one of the restaurant employees saw him with his wallet in his hand. He didn't even give him time to explain. "Hey, you! What are you doing with that wallet?" the man shouted, approaching with a menacing look. Tommaso tried to explain, but couldn't find the words. The employee, suspecting that the boy wanted to steal, grabbed him by the arm and abruptly pushed him away from the back of the restaurant. "Get out of here," he told him, chasing him away without listening to his justifications. Shaken and frightened, Tommaso ran away, still clutching the package of sweets that had been given to him. But in his mind there was neither the sweet nor the unfair treatment he had just received. No, the only thing he could think about was the photo. How could this be possible? When Giulia returned from work that evening, Tommaso wasted no time in telling her everything. The meeting with Lorenzo, the cake, and most importantly, the photo. "Mom, there was a photo of us, the one from when I was little. Why do you have it in your wallet?" Giulia listened in silence, and when Tommaso finished, tears ran down her face. She knew that the moment she had always feared had arrived. "Tommaso," Giulia began, her voice breaking with emotion, "there's something I've never told you, and now I think is the right time to explain it to you." Tommaso remained silent, his heart beating faster and faster as he tried to understand what his mother was about to tell him. Giulia took a moment, gathered all the courage she could, and continued, "Mr. Lorenzo is your father." Tommaso was paralyzed for a moment. He couldn't fully understand what Giulia was telling him. "My father?" he asked in an uncertain voice, as if those words didn't make sense. Giulia nodded, and the tears continued to fall. "When I was young, Lorenzo and I fell in love, but we were too different. He belonged to a rich and powerful family, and I came from a simple family. When I found out I was pregnant with you, I thought it was best to let him go. I didn't want you to grow up in an environment of conflict and impossible expectations." Tommaso tried to process all that information, but there was still one question that nagged at him. "And the photo? Why does he have our photo?" Giulia smiled faintly. "Even though Lorenzo and I separated, there was a part of me that hoped that you could have a bond with him one day. When you were born, I sent that photo to Lorenzo, telling him that I had moved to another city and that I was fine. I didn't want him to worry about me or come looking for us. I thought it was better this way." He never responded, but apparently he kept the photo with him. The next day, Giulia made an important decision. Even though she was terrified of seeing Lorenzo again after all these years, she knew that Tommaso deserved answers. So mother and son went to Lorenzo's house. When they arrived, Giulia rang the doorbell with shaking hands. Tommaso's heart was racing, unsure of what to expect. Lorenzo opened the door and for a moment remained still, surprised and confused to see Giulia there in front of him. But when his eyes rested on Tommaso, something changed. He immediately realized who that boy was. His hands shook slightly, and in a low but excited voice he said, "Tommaso." Emotions poured out in that moment. Words were superfluous. Lorenzo, with eyes full of tears, hugged Tommaso, finally feeling that bond that he had missed for years. Giulia, although still full of uncertainties, also joined in that embrace. From that day on, Tommaso's life changed forever. He was no longer just the curious boy who wandered the streets of his neighborhood. Now he knew who he was. He knew his past and the bond that united him to Lorenzo, his father. Did you like this story? Leave a comment below. Thanks for watching the video till the end, and see you next story.